Now here's another by Van Eyck. It's a very famous picture, the Betrothal of the Arnolfini. What's happening here, it's kind of humorous, you might think she's in a family way, but in fact that apparently was just the style of the day for a woman. A betrothal in those days was tantamount to what marriage is today. And this seems to have been recorded in a painting as if a picture with the notary public signing it would attest to the fact that this event really occurred. So once again, oil painting, and you see here these folds of the cloth painted in the way that I just mentioned, but a couple of other things happening here. There's funny little objects around here. There's oranges on the table. There's a dog standing here. Well, the dog usually was a code illustration for fidelity. But notice the dog. We'll see a close-up of it very quickly. It's as if the individual hairs were painted on the dog. Van Eyck more or less showing what could be done with oils. But this back here is another element we're going to take a closer look at, because it really seems that Van Eyck played kind of an interesting trick on people here. This is a mirror, and it's reflecting in kind of a fisheye way the backside of the people that we're seeing here the front side of. And here we see Van Eyck's signature. So let's take a closer look. Here's what that mirror looks like. And you see here the backside of the two people we just saw. Right here. But you'll also see now close up, there are all of these little pictures, the Stations of the Cross. Here. All of these pictures all have detail. And let's go in a little closer. It's as if Van Eyck was really trying to make the point that look at what you can do. This is a tiny, tiny detail on the picture that we looked at. But all of that could be represented as well, because he could work so much longer with the oil paints. So let's go back here. You see, that really is a rather small part of this picture, and the little pictures that we're talking about are tiny by comparison. So once again, a demonstration of what can be done with oil as a better medium, a more flexible and capable medium than egg tempera. And here's the dog I mentioned. You can see close up that all the little individual hairs that would also be painted here, this type of detail, more or less I think to show off what could be done with oil, because this was very early in the era that oil was being tried out as a binder for pigments. Now here we have another painting. This ends up the chapter for Gombrich. What's happening here is really a demonstration once again of realism, but it's in keeping with the Renaissance idea that if you made the scene being pictured more realistic, more to the way that the viewer could insert themselves into the scene, that it made the Bible story that was being depicted here that much more real for people. So what we see is a scene after Jesus' resurrection where he reappears to some of his apostles. They're fishing in a boat, they don't recognize him, and he's standing on the shore, and they're not catching any fish. So he tells them, well, cast your net over there, and you'll catch a lot of fish. And they catch a lot of fish. And then Peter recognizes that it's Jesus. So he jumps in the water, and he's trying to flounder around coming to him. Well, interesting scene. It was on the Sea of Tiberias, which is actually the Sea of Galilee. And it didn't look like this. This is far greener than the desert area of Galilee, and these were not the kinds of buildings that existed there. In fact, this is the very scenery of the locality in which Witts painted this. So the people who viewed this would actually be able to relate to this scenery. In fact, as Gombrich points out, at least when Gombrich wrote his book, this scenery here still is very much like it is in this painting. I'm sure it's been more built up in this area than it is here. But people could relate to this. Here was Jesus and this biblical scene being acted out right there where they were. They could feel that much closer to the action as a result of this. So this is just an interesting way of pursuing this idea of realism. Realism coming into play in artwork. And the other types of perspective that we're going to be taking a look at, there's a very important page in the workbook, page 46, a summary of perspective techniques. That would be a very good thing for you to look at this point. The types of techniques mentioned there: atmospheric perspective, light perspective, focus perspective, positional perspective, and of course linear perspective. It's really going to be important for you to understand all those different types of perspective. If I gave you a picture like this on the final exam, it would be entirely reasonable for me to ask you, show me, point out, circle the places on here where each of the different types of perspective are being used. Well, what would you do on this one? This one's perhaps not a good example. There may be some atmospheric perspective going on here. But maybe not, because these things in the distance don't really seem very blued out. Better review page 46 to make sure you understand how each one of those types of perspective actually look in a painting. And I'll be covering more of that in the next lecture. And that's the end of the slides for Chapter 12.